First speaker is Andy Vitale. He's the Executive Vice President of Design at Rocket Companies, a member of the Adobe Design Circle, and adjunct professor for Kent State University's User Experience Design graduate program, and serves on the advisory board for multiple professional organizations and educational institutions. In his personal life, Andy is an avid sneaker collector, as we've just discovered today, a fan of Luca Libre, and a seasonal food and drink enthusiast. He's my type of person. He lives in Charlotte, North Carolina with his wife, Amy, and two rescue pups, Gringo and Geraldo Rivera. Please welcome to the stage, Andy Vitale. Thanks.
I don't even, all right, there we go, it's on, sweet. All right, good morning. It's nice to be in Toronto, and it's nice that the air quality is getting better today. So that was, yesterday was like, holy shit, what's going on? Anyway, like you said, I work at Rocket Companies. We've got a design organization of about 160 with our interns, 190 people. We focus on lending, personal finance, pretty much anything in the financial journey. So I'm just going to talk today. I typically talk a lot to leaders. They told me not to walk around. I'm a walker, so I'm going to anchor myself if I catch it. But it's all about how we advance design in an organization, right? And that happens at every level. So some of the things I'm going to talk about are a little bit of tips for leaders, but as you hear that, maybe you'll get some empathy for the work that your leaders are trying to do and find ways to plug in on the ground up. So we've all seen a ton of reports around how good design is good for business and the impact of design and what it means. We've seen these reports created for multiple years across hundreds of publicly traded companies, and thousands of people participated in these surveys. And we recite these all the time because we want our organizations, we want our business partners to understand how important design is. But the truth is, we can't just show them a report and say, hey, now you understand the impact of design, because companies are at different points in their journey. And you know, some of the realities that some of you may be facing are things like this. Just show of hands. Do you work in a safe space? Do you work in an organization where decisions are being made without design having a seat at the table? Anybody like that? Yep. So this is where design is that last-minute checkbox without the ability to really make an impact on the outcome. Maybe they're brought in like after something goes wrong. And this is a sign that there's trouble coordinating internally, and there may be a lack of understanding of how decisions get made. How about, do any of you work in an organization where other functions appear to be valued more than design? Yep, a couple of hands. This is like when the majority of projects get buy-in when they're started in non-design functions, and maybe there's not even dedicated design support. And this could be because there's no way to really measure the impact of design. This one's one of my favorite. When I got to Rocket, we outsourced, we worked with a lot of external partners. They were seen as how trusted are they? Or they champion more as experts than the internal teams who have more than enough capability to do the work. This is because there's maybe a lack of understanding in how the design team thinks about the way the company makes money and building those trusted relationships. And finally, do you happen to work somewhere where research insights are not factored into decisions? And this is where maybe user or market insights aren't getting involved in product and design decisions. You know, according to UserZoom, they ran a State of the Union report in 2022. They say that 45% of organizations fail to properly integrate design and user research into the product development lifecycle. It's wild. And then maybe it's where design is positioned in the organization. So for us at Rocket now, design's been on this journey, this transformation. When I started, design reported into product. We had a chief product officer. As design matured, it moved out of product, and under a chief experience officer where sat marketing and technology and data, and it was an interesting place for design, but now design reports directly into the CEO, which at a 20,000 person organization with multiple companies, that's an interesting spot to be. So when you think about that, just 13% of companies have design in the C-suite. The most senior leaders, which is over 60% of design leaders, tend to be found in middle management, directors, senior managers. So how do we figure out how to actually mature design as a practice, right? We're seeing design become common practice in organizations. We're seeing how design enhances the brand experience, how it advances innovation. We're seeing that, design having that seat at the table is something that we talked about for a long time, and it right now is the most mature it's ever been, definitely in the 20 years since I started. So how do we measure the maturity of design in an organization? So a quick Google search will tell you there's a lot of ways and a lot of charts and a lot of things. And the truth is, it's not worth getting hung up on any of these, right? When I started at Rocket, we picked the Nielsen Norman model. We thought the Nielsen Norman model would be the one that tells us, all right, it best matched where we were and where we wanted to go. We ended up incorporating design's growth and maturity into our company OKRs. And where we landed is this version of a maturity model that is important to me. It's one that, as I worked in different places, I had the opportunity of working at 3M. When I got to 3M, Mauro Porcini, who's now the Chief Design Officer at Pepsi, was leaving 3M, and Eric Quint was stepping in, who was the Chief Design Officer coming from Philips. And they both have very different models that are interesting to me and ways that I can start to measure maturity. So the first stage is apathy. And apathy is where an organization doesn't really have interest in doing things differently. And this is pretty common, right? Someone understood there's a need to create a function of design, but they don't really know what to do with it. Morrow kind of called this denial. And then you go to stage 2, and that's kind of awareness. And this is where design exists in some pockets of the org. And these people have been introduced to design, but a lot of the organization doesn't really understand what design is doing. This is where you can leverage design to help storytelling, to start to talk to people and say, hey, we can help visualize your ideas. Eventually, you might get a pilot project. Once you get that pilot project, when I was at 3M, we worked on a pilot project to increase productivity of people that were doing medical billing at hospitals. And we saw that they were able to get 60 charts, 60 bills out the door per hour, and everyone's like, that's great. We jumped in, we changed some things around, we were able to increase their productivity by 30%. So if hospitals can make more money faster, and we can start to measure quality of care at the same time to prevent readmissions, this is something that the organization was interested in because it was a tool that they served. So at this point, the people that we worked with, they started to appreciate design. This is where design might not sit everywhere, but you start to hear people say, hey, I had design work on this project for me. If they're not working on this for you, they brought me great results. This is a place to do that. The next stage is where those people that are actually talking about you, they talk about you when you're not in the room. They're really going to bat for design. Make sure design's here. If they're not here, I don't see them. This is really important. This is where people are starting to ask for design on every project, and the organization starts to see the value. And then finally, it becomes widely adopted. It becomes part of the organizational process. Everyone kind of understands that value that design brings. But the most interesting thing about this is it's like a unicorn, right? There are not many organizations that actually do this, and this is what we all strive for, but it's a hard path to get there. I would say that it doesn't exist in many places. We're still trying to get there at Rocket. So when you think about how you advance design in an organization, I'm going to talk about a couple of key things. The first one is you've got to build a solid foundation. What does this mean? How do you build things? Because leaders will change, people will change. You've got to start somewhere that you can build upon. And then it's about how you build those key relationships. And relationships are going to be really important to help you make an impact, because making an impact is something that's really important. How do you actually do that? How do you measure that? And what does it take for a leader to take a team through that, to take an organizational through that? And then once you're starting to get that buy-in, how do you scale that team? When I started at Rocket, we were 40 designers. Now we're 170-ish. You add interns, we're close to 200. And we've got all of design. We've got all of research, including market research. We have all of brand. And we keep adding more competencies as the needs arise. And then it's really important, how do you take this constant transformation, and build a culture or add on to an organizational culture that may be strong? Our company's 36 years old, 22-ish thousand people. I can't shrug my shoulders. And then from there, it's like, what do we do? So let's talk about building a solid foundation. This is everything that you need to really be successful, because there are roles and responsibilities that your team has. And when you ask people what they do, they sometimes are confused. Like, I'm a UX designer. Does that mean you do some research? Does that mean you do IA? Like, what are you actually doing? Are you content strategy? And if the team members can't articulate what they're doing to their partners, then their partners have no idea what this team is supposed to do. So this requires a partnership with, like, your HR team. And then beyond that, you have to start to look at a few things, like titles. We went ahead and we looked at our titles, and we had information architect, UX designer, UI designer, content strategist, UX writer, design strategist, conversational designer, service designer. It's like, wait, like, why do we have so many generalists? It's really hard to scale a team. So we started to pull roles in. Our UX writers and content strategists are now content designers. Our UX designers and UI designers are now experience designers. It's ways that we can help the organization understand that, like, design is design. You don't need to know all of the flavors yet until you really need specialties, and then we'll bring them in. And then those job descriptions are things that we use for external treatment too. So how do you leverage a job description so that people understand clarity and what's expected of them? And the expectations are so hard because everyone wants to know if they're doing a good job. At their role, with their title, at their level, like, how are they being measured? We tried 10 times to create different frameworks to help people understand it. And as we've done surveys, we kept hearing, I still don't understand what's expected of me in my role. So we finally rolled out this new career framework like 2 weeks ago, where there's 40 things that people are evaluated on. They went ahead and they measured, like, you evaluate yourself. If after your self-evaluation is done, you're going to sit down and talk to your leader about how they're evaluating you. It's not about performance, it's about growth. So you might say that you're an expert in 32 of these 40 things, and then your leader might say you're an expert in 2 of those things, because who's really an expert at 40 things? I put myself as an expert in like 5, and my head of ops is like, you're not an expert in 5 things. So I was like, all right, cool. If that's the bar, then let's roll with it, because we're always trying to level up our team. And then we created career paths for if you want to lead people or if you want to continue to do work. And we've got 7 levels from associate designer all the way through principal, and we go all the way up. And it's provided clarity. The other thing is about collaboration. And collaboration's interesting because it's a way of working. And I said collaboration here instead of process, because when I say process, I notice if we don't have a documented process, everyone becomes paralyzed. And it's like, wait a minute, don't we all kind of work the same way? Do we really need, like, whatever we're going to call it, discover, define, build, launch, iterate? Like, we're doing that. That's what we do. So it's more important about how we collaborate with people, how we work together. Design is collaborative by nature, and that's important. And so how do you focus on the way the team collaborates amongst each other, and then work on how they collaborate externally as well? And you just got to find that right balance. And then the other thing is, how do you operationalize design? How do you build a design team that can operate at scale, that can work on certain things? And what you realize in the beginning is everybody's working a little bit on operations. Someone's working on process, someone's working on how we interview people, someone's working on how we measure our work, someone's building our principles, and it's like a little side hustle for everybody. And that's great if that's where you're at as an organization, but at some point you get to a place where you can hire people that are dedicated to that. And that's a hard sell. I'm going to go ahead and hire 5 people, but they're not going to actually do work that goes external. So they're not going to impact the day-to-day bottom line of the company. But what they're going to do is actually make the team more efficient and make the team work better so that it does impact the bottom line. So that was a hard win for especially an organization that wasn't really understanding design at the time. Relationships are like the key thing. How we work together is so important, right? How do you create this sense of trust? How do you go through things with people? How do you really build a place where you can have this healthy creative conflict, where each team is like pushing against each other in a way that's trying to provide the right outcomes? And that's so important about design. Has this ability to really like build bridges, but sometimes we start with more empathy for our customers than we do for the people that we're building with. I've seen it a million times where designers will walk in a room, pound their chests, and say, hey, we're here to help solve the problems. And it's like, yeah, we're here to solve everything together. Like, have the empathy for the teams that are building alongside of us. That's how you build those relationships. And also, when you think about your partners, how many of you have ever heard, when it comes to design or research, that it's a little bit slow? Anybody hear that? Yeah. So a lot of times, designers like to jump into a project brought in late and then say, hey, wait, let me get caught up to what we're doing. Let me figure it out. Let's go back and redo this research because you didn't have a true researcher on it. And the company's like, wait, we can't do that. Like, we can't bring you in to slow us down. So Wayne Gretzky, it's still hockey season for me. This is terrible to say in this town, but I'm a Florida Panthers fan. And I mean, they're getting destroyed right now. But at the same time, Wayne Gretzky had that quote where he used to skate to where the puck is going. It's the same thing with your partners. You've got to meet them where they're going. It's kind of like running alongside of them, but they don't know that you're there in the beginning, so you're just trying to catch up. Just really like get to where they're going and figure out how you can add value there as opposed to trying to rewind everything that they're doing. And we use a lot of jargon as designers, right? We talk about things that nobody really understands because they're not in it with us. We talk to our partners like they're fellow designers. And the thing is, we've got to have this shared vocabulary. We've got to connect design to business opportunities. We have to be curious about the business and understand what matters to them. We have to learn how our companies make money. We have to uncover what motivates the stakeholders and be fluent in language of the business so that we don't seem disconnected from our partners. And then we've got to translate those business challenges to the design team so that we're all speaking the same way. We're talking about the value of design in ways that the business people understand. And then once you kind of have built these relationships, how do you communicate? What is that strategy? Does your team send out a newsletter? Do you do a critique? Do you stand up an internal website? There's so many things that you do based on different stakeholders and who's interpreting that information that you're trying to really amplify the work that's going out. We've done internal newsletters, external newsletters, one-pagers, weekly updates, quarterly updates, big share-outs twice a year, a printout of all of our work at the end of the year. And then you realize, like, we put a lot of work into creating things, but nobody really read them. They didn't have the time. They didn't really care. So how do you understand your audience in a way of, like, an executive just wants, like, a high-level summary. If you want to put a visual in to, like, make them stop and look at it, that's great. Maybe it's a one-on-one conversation instead of a mass mailing. You've got to kind of look at the analytics of what you're doing. Are people opening the emails? Are they clicking on the links? What are they, like, how are they digesting it? And then when you talk to them, are they asking you questions about it? So you've got to build a strategy based on who you're communicating to. It's not different than as we build things that we're designing for people. These are people that we're sending out some sort of design to that we want to meet them. And then when you're trying to really collaborate with people and go through things and work well as a team, sometimes there's nothing like just going through shit together. Like when it gets bad, when something breaks, when we don't know what the outcome is going to be, when everyone comes together in that last-minute scramble to fix something, to get something out the door, that's how you really build that trust in the relationship. Because these, like, it was bad. Like, we were worried, we were scared, we were getting yelled at. Like, none of that is great and should be happening, but it happens, that tension, that anxiety. So having people to go through that together, when you come out of that, you're just kind of closer. All right, so, oh man, this is my favorite, right? You've heard it all before. Show, don't tell. Build momentum. Get quick wins and make progress. And all of that is true. But it's not about this grand reveal. It's how we work as designers at different altitudes. How do we tie threads and show the value of design and be included in the work that the team is doing? So McKinsey said there are 4 ways to show design impact, right? Really understand your customer. We know this. These are like pretty common sense things. Bring empathy to the organization. Another superpower that design has. As we understand the people that use our products, we really want them to get involved. How do we design in real time? Our work isn't super precious, right? We really want people to see early work, to share in early work. We love when our PMs are in Figma. A year ago, we would have hated it, and we did hate it. We acquired a company, and they worked that way, and they joined our team, and our team were like, why are they moving our files around? Like, what's going on? It's like, that's how we're collaborating now. Like, we're collaborating in real time. And then act quickly. At Rocket, we talk about responding with a sense of urgency. How do we get our ideas out there so that we can learn what's going on, how people are receiving them, how important that is, where we're hitting the mark, where we're missing the mark? It's really important. And focus on outcomes over outputs, right? We create a lot of deliverables. We create wireframes, flowcharts, site maps, journey maps, IA models, prototypes, low fidelity, high fidelity. Do we have to? Sometimes yes. But the reason we create these artifacts is to share our intent and what we're building with other people. And sometimes you don't need to go through all of the different fidelities. Sometimes you don't need to build things that aren't important. It's about the outcomes that are delivered. So Phil Gilbert, who was the GM of design at IBM, which was the largest design organization at one time, he talked about how when he started there, he used to talk to people about not what design's impact is, not evangelizing design thinking, but they were going to evangelize outcomes delivered to the market that were a result of these practices, because the business cared more about market outcomes, and in order to accelerate the outcomes, they used these practices, and that's how he got design bought in. So since we're talking about leaders, let's talk about leadership. But first we'll talk about how you measure, because measuring is the most important thing, right? Think about ways that you measure the impact of design. Sometimes it's conversion, sometimes it's dollars. Every company, every industry has slightly different ways to measure things. At Rocket, we leverage Google's Heart framework. NPS for us is a company-wide objective. OKRs are ways to bring that through. And then when we bring it to the executives, we think how executives measure design. And this is back to the user Zoom survey. This is wild. 60% are business metrics. It goes through web analytics and what outcomes are being delivered and net promoter score. Other scores like a SUS score that measure perception of usability. 3% use other metrics. But 10% do not measure at all, which is kind of wild. How do we teach them to really measure that impact of design? And how do you establish what good is and quality and show the team and the org what that means? How do you have safe critiques that constantly push the team forward and raise the bar and elevate the craft? And that's a hard conversation to hear, this work is good, but it's not good enough. It's not industry leading. How do you push that team to still feel that and drive forward and still have that passion and coach them along the way? And then you've got to celebrate these wins and amplify them and have these successes, because people love to be part of it. So when you're like, hey, we hit this mark, or we moved conversion 2%, celebrate that, because it's so important for the organization to see that and be part of that, because they feel like they're part of something, and it's really helpful. So I said we were going to talk about leadership, and it's about, some might call it fearless. I don't believe there's anyone that's truly fearless. I don't wake up a day and say, I'm going into this thing and it's going to be great and I'm not worried what happens, because this is a journey and it's our job and it affects people. So how do we talk about what it means to inspire others? How do you model design? How do you tell stories about design to elevate it? How do you champion for design within the organization? How do you be a thought leader both internally and externally, so it signals the organization's investment in design so that you can let people know that might want to work there? You need to grow and mature the team, empower them, and remove roadblocks for them. It's about creating this change in an organization. It's about how you talk about design both upward and downward. How do you coordinate design efforts with other efforts that are going on in the organization? It's teaching people these new ways of working, which are sometimes met with resistance, oftentimes met with resistance. How do we drive those new ways of providing value? How do we take the organization out of its comfort zone to drive this alignment and understanding, right? How do you use words that matter? How do you create this? Design itself brings these thoughts and ideas to the table that are starting points. So when you show early work to someone, they can say, no, that's not it at all, but then they want to lean in and say, but it's more like this, and enabling that collaboration through what we're doing. And how do we design experiences and enable the organization to actually do so successfully? And being a leader is about setting a vision. And when I talk about a vision, it's part aspirational, but it's part tangible. So it's great to say where we want to get to, and it's great to create a path. At Rocket, I created a 10-year plan, and 2.5 years in, we've done some things that were year 10, and we haven't done some things yet that are year 1, because it's not linear. It's like, how do we move different pieces and roll a ball up the hill 5% here and 20% there? So that vision has to help the team understand where they're going, but the organization might say, like, this is complete bullshit. So what you have to do is really understand how to make that tangible so everyone else sees that you've moved that needle, that things have gone forward. Getting the team on board is one thing, getting the entire organization is another. And then all of this is through design transformation. What I learned early on is it takes the square root of 1% of the organization to really drive things forward. At 3M, we were 90,000 people. The design team were around 100. We were able to really, really drive outcomes, and it wasn't just us. It was the people that we worked with. So when it comes to also advancing design, it's about scaling. Scaling's interesting because there are many ways to scale. You can scale in scope, you can scale in size. The way to do that is find opportunities to add value. I talked about the pilot projects that we did before. Pilot projects are super important because it allows you to really showcase that value, and then people are like, I want it on there, and it's like, okay, but we can't be on 5 things at once. So how do we add another team to work on this? How do we add new competencies? We've added service design, conversational design, design ops, research ops, design strategy, strategic foresight. So it's like, let's bring in this person that has this skill set, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I want that over here too. It's like, all right, well, that person can't work on everything, so we need to scale. And scaling isn't done alone either. So when you think about how the ratios work, the ideal ratio is like a designer with a PM with a handful of engineers. There's no magic number there. When I worked at 3M, we had 72 scrum teams with a design team of 4 people. What we've done now is we've kind of aligned on ratios, but more importantly, we aligned on work can't continue without certain people being involved. So if a new project starts up and they've got a handful of engineers or an engineering team, that engineering team can't really start unless we hire a PM for that work and a design team for that work. It still happens, right? But we're trying to get to a point where the engineering team's like, no, we're not going to touch that until we have the right resources to support it. And that's done through those relationships. And then hiring and recruiting is really important. How do you recruit top talent? What does that look like? What is that process? Is it do you talk to 15 people over 3 months with 4 presentations? Or do you create a way to learn about people quickly and be able to add them to the organization? What does it look like to hire leaders? What is that process? How do you think that through? And then it's about making intentional hires. It's about hiring people that add to your organization. It's not hiring 5 more designers that do the same thing. Maybe it's hiring someone that wasn't a designer. Maybe they were a teacher because you need them to educate people on process. And it's about finding the right skill set to add what you have, not adding more of what you have for no reason. Bob Baxley talks about how in order to maintain this pipeline of talent, leaders spend 15 to 20% of their time doing strategic outreach. That's LinkedIn, that's speaking at events, that's checking out blog posts. That is whatever it takes to find the right talent to bring them into the organization. It's really important. The other thing that we talk about that's really probably the most important is culture. So I like to talk about how I build a design organization kind of like Grey's Anatomy. So Grey's Anatomy, they're on season 900 now. But when they start, they're a teaching hospital. And I want to create a teaching organization. I want people to come in and learn and grow and do their best work. And our leaders are aligned on that too. And we realize that people won't stay with us forever. By the time season 8 rolls around, it's time for Meredith to leave. Oh, she lasted season 19. But at some point, people will leave, and that's okay. They become part of your portfolio, and they move on. But hopefully they learned and did great work so that they start to refer people back. Hey, as I mentor these new people in the industry, like, I learned so much at Rocket, you should go work there. And that pipeline and those relationships last forever. This is such a small, although it feels like such a big industry, it's so small. I mean, Berman, who you're going to talk about, who's going to talk to you later, him and I both live in Charlotte, but I haven't seen him in I don't know how long. I'm never in Charlotte, but we see each other at conferences, so it's really great. Like, you'll be surprised who you run into. I had dinner last night with someone I know from Adobe that used to work at FITC years ago. It's like the community is small. So when we think about culture, it's about this shared set of beliefs and principles. What's the purpose of the team? What's their mission? How do you get people aligned on principles? And then what rituals do you have? Does your team go out for pizza? Do you do a design critique called like Design and Donuts? At some point, we wanted to reward the best successes and best failures, and this was probably one of my worst ideas of, everyone go ahead and nominate your biggest failure for the month, and we'll vote to see if you were the worst failure of the whole team, and when you win, you'll get a little cup that says you tried. And then we realized nobody wanted to do that, so we changed that. And now we just celebrate successes and learnings and birthdays and anniversaries, and we have awards for best partners. Whatever you choose to do, and you can iterate through that, like find something that your team feels good about and what works best for them. We also, like I said, we look for people that don't have design experience. So we look for people that have other experiences. We look for people that are diverse, that bring something to the table that we didn't have. A different background, a different way of learning, a different way of thinking, because diversity creates ways for teams to see, hear, and understand different perspectives, and it helps them look at things differently to create better outcomes. We talked about growth and development because people want to be challenged. They want to do their best work. They want to know that the company, that the team is invested in them and how well they're going to be. And you know, sometimes you do that with like hack days and different ways to bring the teams out of their comfort zone and shared learnings. We also developed a community of practice. So when I started, design was split out into different areas. And it's like, all right, we're not going to centralize design yet. So how do we help the organization learn? So we started to hold time where we'd bring in speakers or we'd do shared learnings and we'd pull everyone together. And then it helped us solve problems faster, and then people realize, hey, you know what, the designers aren't going to get growth from me in this little pocket that I have them in. It makes sense for them to be with other designers so they can challenge each other and push and grow. And that community of practice is something that you can start anywhere. If there's another designer that you work with that isn't on your team, just like, how do you do a lunch and learn together? How do you bring people together? It's about trust and safety. To me, a good team feels okay challenging everyone and anyone, no matter what their title is. Like, say, hey, I don't agree with that, or challenge someone's way of thinking and do it in a way that's direct and honest and coming from a place of care, because that creates psychological safety and people feel comfortable, and that's so important. So I guess what I'm trying to say is all of this is just a journey, and what you have to do is do what design does, which is iterate, because it's design. And the challenges that we face are going to be different everywhere. We just have to think about the people that we work with and the relationships we want to build and how we continue to push and evangelize and educate people about design. And the process is messy, but it's worth it. So that's all I had to say, except for I think we launched a new episode of our podcast. We took a little break, so there's like 37 episodes. Lisa Welchman, who wrote a book called Managing Chaos on digital governance, her and I have been doing this for a little bit of time. So if any of this is interesting or you want to hear from really interesting people, just check it out.